Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Very much weekend attire.
Because I'm in my dressing gown, I thought maybe we should take a screenshot to put out with a podcast. It'd be quite funny.
No.
To say, here we are.
No.
Come on.
No.
Quiet Riot.
Holy smokes! It's time once again for Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend vicar to our Thursday kicker. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Alex Andreou. Now, you may or may not know that we have made a conscious decision to make all of our content available to all of our listeners, regardless of their ability to pay. It felt really wrong to join the paywall and say to people, you get this bit and you get that bit.
But we did still want ways to acknowledge those who are able to support us financially. So we decided to make them co-creators of our content by inviting them to regular, open strategy and editorial meetings.
Well, we held the first such meeting on Thursday, and I am pleased to report that we were blessed with an amazing turnout of Ko-Fi supporters, a wonderful atmosphere, and dozens of great ideas.
Yep, it is straight to heaven for those angels. If you couldn't make it, the minutes are going to be going up on Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod shortly, and we're going to aim to hold those kinds of meetings quarterly so that our wonderful supporters can help deliver us from evil.
Or lead us further into temptation. You too can join their swelling ranks by making a one-off donation or a small monthly stipend on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Now, on with today's show. What stories do we want to mop up, Naomi, from the week that do not involve closed donations? Because frankly, I'm so sick of that.
Well, actually, Alex, I didn't mention something on the main show, and I should have declared an interest when we were discussing the Labour donations from Lord Waheed Alli. So Waheed Alli and I were at the same event a couple of years ago, and it was winter, and we had never met previously to my knowledge, but we did end up sitting next to each other and chit-chatting away, and I didn't actually realise who he was. Even when he was telling me all about his amazing TV production career, I was like, oh, I've lucked out sitting next to somebody quite interesting. And most of the time we were actually talking about LGBT activism and how much he'd done in that space. So obviously I thought, I'm sat here with a good fellow progressive. Didn't really clock who he was. It was an evening event, and it did start to snow quite heavily at about 9 p.m. And by 10 p.m, it was a couple of inches deep and falling thicker and faster and heavier. And I decided I should probably leave rather than risk getting stranded staying any later. And I had driven to this event, and I was worried about, frankly, driving back in worsening conditions. At that stage, it was even, am I going to be able to get my car out?
Oh, you were there with your car, yeah.
The space that it was in. So I sort of was making my excuses and saying goodbye to everybody. And I turned to him and I said, I'm going to leave now. Do you want a lift? And he accepted. So I drove him through treacherous conditions all the way back to his home, even though that meant going quite a bit out of my way, navigating some very narrow, icy streets. And Alex, he didn't give me a penny. Not a penny. He is in my debt. I funded that trip. Ali took a bung from me. So there we go. I should have declared that interest last week, and I didn't. But you all now know.
Not even gas money?
Nothing.
What a liberty.
Quiet Riot.
Well, since we recorded the show on Thursday, I think something that got a bit of pickup, but not a huge amount, and I think might be interesting for you and I to chat through, was the resignation of the Conservative whip by Baroness Warsi, Saida Warsi. And for listeners who have been living under a rock, she was Britain's first Muslim cabinet member. She entered government under David Cameron back in 2010. And when I saw the news, I don't know about you, Alex, but the only surprise I had was what took you so long? I was just shocked it hadn't happened sooner. It felt like something that had been brewing for a very long time. But I suppose having got the Labour conference out of the way and all eyes turning to the Tory conference in Birmingham, which is about to kick off, that looks set to be nothing but a who can be the most intolerant of minority groups in order to inherit the crown-a-thon. I suppose that's as good a time as any for someone who had previously been a kind of one-woman Islamophobia rebuttal unit in the Tories to finally jack it in. I mean, I doubt you were particularly surprised by the news either. I think we've both been around her at events over the years and found her to be very comfortable in the kind of progressive space that we occupy.
I do understand the instinct to kind of stay and fight for what you see as your party. Do you know what I mean? I don't entirely begrudge her that. I do understand that instinct, though, because I had the same conversation with myself when I was quite unhappy with Corbyn. As you know, I voted for Corbyn the first time round because my politics, especially my economics, is far, far to the left of where the Labour Party are now. And so what he was promising was really very attractive to me. So I voted for him the first time round. I was quite disappointed in the way he not only didn't grow into a leader, he seemed to have shrunk into the position somehow. I was really particularly annoyed with the way he conducted himself around the referendum on membership of the European Union. I thought he did really the minimum he could have done, if not done actual damage by his absence. And so I had that same sort of conversation with myself around that time. Do I leave the Labour Party? And the bargain I struck with myself is that I left the Labour Party and joined the Fabian Society, which still gives me voting rights, as it were, in the Labour Party, but it means my contribution is going to something substantially different, albeit affiliated. So I do understand that battle with oneself. Do I stay when the thing has become something that I'm uncomfortable with?
I say this all the time, James. I feel like I'm in a toxic relationship and I need to get out. I know I need to get out. Everybody around me is telling me I need to get out. But I can't, because in the end, I believe in the Conservative Party. These are my values. But the Conservative Party don't believe in Conservative values anymore. So we've got to hold the line and hope and pray and work towards bringing them back into the centre ground.
I think good on her, both before and now. Good on her for staying and trying to fight.
Yeah.
And good on her for finally realising that the party right now, it just has almost nothing in common with Cameron's effort to modernise it, to make it socially progressive. It's just a totally different animal.
And the issues are vast on that front in terms of the colour of the party now versus the colour of the party under Cameron. I'm not talking about skin colour, I'm talking about, the approaches to climate change, gay rights, etc., etc. The general Islamophobia, though, in the Tory party does seem to be pervasive. We've had generic, what was it he said during the riots, like anyone shouting Allahu Akbar should be arrested immediately. We had Badenoch when the 5 pro-Gaza independent MPs were elected. She claimed it was, quote, on the back of sectarian Islamist politics, and said they are an alien idea that have no place here. It does feel that Islamophobia is now even more acceptable within the Conservative Party than anti-Semitism had been in parts of the Labour Party a few years ago.
Even more interesting was the affair over which she resigned. And I don't know, do you know anything about it?
I do a bit, but come on, our listeners might not, so talk us through.
So as I understand it, it was basically about two women who held a placard at
That's
a
right.
pro-Palestine rally
And she backed them.
that depicted, I think it was Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak as coconuts. The term itself is a racialized slur about people who are brown on the outside but white on the inside. And she was charged with various offences and she was acquitted. And there was a lot of people saying this is a disgusting thing to say, but it doesn't cross the line into inciting any kind of action. It's basically an unpleasant comment, but a comment nevertheless in a country with free politics. And so Saida Warsi basically, when they were acquitted, posted a selfie of herself with a big sort of coconut cocktail. All the usual suspects got outraged, and that was the basis of the final falling out, as it were. And many people say, the party should have kicked her out anyway and should not have given her the chance to resign the whip. The famously mellow
Jenkins.
Yeah, Andrea Jenkins got involved with a really quite nasty tweet, bringing Saida Warsi's family into it. The whole thing was vile. Cleverly got involved, suggested that she'd called him a coconut. And everyone took that on faith. There were like a lot of people replying to that series of tweets saying, why did she call him a coconut? And it's like, she didn't. She never did. This argument never involved James Cleverly. Yeah. Basically, his leadership campaign is flagging. And he knows that Saida Warsi is someone who is unpopular both with the parliamentary party and members, because she's seen as a troublemaker on Islamophobia. And he's just giving her a kicking to boost his profile.
Yeah.
What did you think of the whole...
Well, I thought Jenkins, I found her tweet absolutely reprehensible, and I commented underneath it 1,000,000 times, deleting what I really wanted to write. And then I ended up just saying, my God, you sound more reform and less conservative by the day. And the blurred lines between the populist right-wing rhetoric coming out of the Reform Party and now many, many conservative leading lights is there for all to see. The assimilation is almost complete. I think it's disgraceful. That said, Warsi isn't... Look, I've met her at some very progressive events. There's a group called I think, British Muslims for Secular Democracy. I think that's right, because I always think, is their acronym BDSM? But I think they narrowly escaped that, and it's not. It's BS. Anyway, they're a brilliant group, by the way. Yeah. And everyone should support them because they do brilliant stuff. But it is a very progressive left kind.
That sounds like a great group.
It is. They're fantastic.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
We should get them on the show, actually. And she's been at their events. And Mike, she fitted in she'd been there forever. It didn't feel like you had a very traditional conservative in the room. She was very relaxed in their company and very in agreement with much of their agenda. That said, I do remember her being homophobic in her early days in politics. Obviously, she entered the cabinet as a member of the House of Lords, but she has run for parliamentary election in the past. And in 2005, she stood in Dewsbury as the candidate there and used quite a lot of homophobic language on her leaflets, which were Labour attack leaflets, claiming things like children were being propositioned for gay relationships because Labour had scrapped Section 28, introduced by the Tories to stop schools being able to promote alternative family relationships and lifestyle choices. And she basically said that Labour reduced the age of consent for homosexuality to 16, which means that school children could be propositioned for homosexual relationships. she has, I think, apologised for that since.
I remember flaming her quite a few times online in the early days of the coalition because she was such a good media performer, basically. She did the media rounds quite frequently and defended austerity to the hilt. But, this is the point of this podcast in many ways, isn't it? It's not to identify who are the saints and who are the superheroes, because no such things exist.
No.
On either side. It's to try and find...
Oh my God, even Donald Tusk wants to kill badgers or beavers or something.
Yeah.
Oh, crumbs. I saw that in the week and I was like, right, never meet your heroes, Naomi. People that have been listening to our podcast for the last 8 years or so will know how in love with Donald Tusk I am. And now he wants to kill the beavers. Oh, God.
Yeah, I know.
Never
horrible. But also he's fending off fascism in Poland. So
but
swings and roundabouts. No, I know. I'm just saying that we live in a world in which the tendency is to do what I call negative vetting, right?
Yep.
That you find the one thing that you find utterly unacceptable that someone
and then
has
you write
said
off
or done,
and everything
and then
they might say.
The rest of their career and work is irrelevant. And I don't think that's a healthy attitude.
Not at all.
And, the whole point of this podcast, like I said, is to try and identify points of contact, points of commonality.
Quiet, Riot. What I want to ask you is about this. Are we all racist towards politicians?
The answer
colour?
is almost yes. It is almost inevitably yes.
It is. If you have to ask a question, you're right. The answer usually is yes. But there do seem to be different expectations of BAME politicians. You brought up on the show a couple of weeks ago the Robinson affair in North Carolina, where this Republican candidate, had been found to have been on forums describing himself as a black Nazi. People sort of feel a sense of more shock and horror when they hear black and Asian prime ministers, home secretaries, etc., making prejudicial comments about people from other countries, refugees, asylum seekers, etc. But presumably it is in and of itself racist to expect people of colour to champion every other person of colour.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Robinson is an interesting example. So he says he would join the KKK if he could, and we should bring slavery back.
But
that's the weirdness of it. He says they wouldn't let me in because they don't let black people in, but I would join them if I could. And it's like, and we should bring slavery back and stuff like that. So this is a half-baked thought. So it is entirely possible I'm going to end up being cancelled, but here goes. I think there is such a thing as a collective identity as well as an individual identity. So when I hear gay people make homophobic comments, it does sting more because it feels like as a group we have fought for an advancement of our rights as a minority. And so to then do something to undermine that from within the group feels particularly wounding. Is that homophobic? I mean, is it homophobic to expect gay people not to undermine gay rights? It seems to me not, but I don't know how to translate that. If you had a Greek spokesperson...
Well, I suppose for me it's when you have women that are pro-life. I find it tougher to take on than when it comes from a man.
Yeah, or women who vote for Trump. A court has decreed that he is a sex offender. And he has said so much himself in that conversation that leaked. And
they
still
let you grab them by the pussy.
Yeah, and still women vote for him. And I find that just profoundly bizarre and very difficult to understand. And I don't think that is being sexist. So that's the point, I think. I have no problem with anyone of any creed and any faith and any colour being conservative in their politics. But when they support and endorse personally candidates who say and do racist stuff, who say and do Islamophobic stuff, I struggle to understand that.
Well, I'm going to invoke my one true God, the only one I really believe in, and that's, of course, Karl Popper, who in The Open Society and Its Enemies talked about the paradox of tolerance. And I will end this section with a little quote. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them.
Quiet, Riot.
Now, a month's rain fell in a day in Liverpool last week, much to Naomi's chagrin, as you may have heard during the weekly episode. This was mere days after Storm Boris. Right across Central Europe, heavy rain, snow, floods, landslides. In some of the worst hit areas of the Czech Republic, Romania and Austria, floods have devastated local communities, leaving at least 24 people dead. Now, what is a weather report, you might ask, doing in a politics podcast? Well, weather is political because it has a cost and it has an impact. And the impact is not the same for everyone. It is unequal. Mitigation might be a solution for the UK, but it isn't for the Solomon Islands, 4 of which have already disappeared. It isn't for Madagascar or Yemen, large swathes of which have turned into uninhabitable deserts. As one climate scientist put it to me, Naomi, we may all be facing the same storm, but we are not in the same kind of boat.
Yeah.
I find that a truly perspective-shifting sentence.
Yep.
Why do you think there is still, it seems, an active discussion of what we do, whether we should even do anything, how fast we go? Why isn't this being treated with the urgency it deserves, I guess is what I'm saying.
I don't think there's one answer to that. I think it is a mixture of vested interest, willful ignorance, lack of education. It is multifaceted. I went to see Kyoto at the Royal Shakespeare Company in the summer, where a friend of the show, Ingrid Oliver, was performing as Angela Merkel in the Kyoto Protocol reenactment. And we're going back, well over 35 years to when those very first climate accords were being debated. Even then, it was so obvious that the smaller Pacific islands were going to be hit first, much, much, much worse than everywhere else. And even those very fact-led, evidence-led pleas at the time were incredibly difficult for the big oil-producing countries and Western economies to care about. But I think partly it's also talking about it in the terms of things like weather. When I was at the Labour Party conference, I did end up speaking to quite a few farmers and farming groups, because obviously Brexit has not been good for them, even though many farmers did vote to leave the EU. And I was asking them, how is business, how's trade, what's happening? And they said, well, the biggest issue, frankly, that we face, not just trade, is weather. And they won't say climate. They won't say climate change. There is still a reticence to accept that this is not only would have been avoidable, but the lack of action on it is going to make it even less avoidable. It was a wet year. It was a wet year.
It doesn't help that, people, especially who are not very young, have within living memory other very hot years or other very wet years. And it's always like, oh, I remember this happened in the, in the 80s. But if you look at frequency, I'll drop a couple of links in the show notes, but the Met Office says that extreme rainfall events are right now twice as frequent as they were in the 80s. That's only 40 years ago. And they will be 4 times more frequent by 2080. Also, if you look at the Copernicus...
That's right, yeah. It's Europe that is warming faster than any other continent.
I know. And the number of days above a certain temperature, the number of heat waves we've had in northern countries, and the wildfires devastating southern Europe.
Yep.
This is the bit that always baffles me in that context, in the context of floods here. Now, every year, pretty much, there will be 2 or 3 big floods, right? And wildfires in southern Europe. Why is that cost never taken into account when you're talking about climate action? Why is the cost of climate action X billion? Why does that not have a minus next to it that takes off the amount of money the government pays every year to deal with floods and wildfires and the rest of the freak
and that's what everybody's saying, that although you mentioned the tragedies that have happened in Czechia and the surrounds, I think you mentioned 24 dead, known to be dead, it would have been far, far, far higher. And if you even remember 20 years ago in the 2002, 2003 floods, it was, death toll was much higher. We are now spending so much on mitigation and emergency aid quickly and evacuation quickly and things like that, that it's not that the weather is getting any less extreme, it's that we are getting, better prepared to deal with the consequences of the outcome.
But like I said, not everyone can.
But no, exactly. And we're not dealing with the upstream, we're not dealing with anything that might slow down the rate of warming. And there was a very good study done this week by the WWA, World Weather Attribution, and they were basically saying that the 4-day period that Boris really hit hardest was an intensity made twice as likely by climate change that they've modelled. And this is a global team. It's got UK scientists as well as those from many, many, many other countries. And essentially, they were saying it is absolutely definitive, and that without question, this was made infinitely worse by rising temperatures. And basically what happens is that you get much more intense rainfall in a hotter world because the warmer atmosphere holds a lot more moisture. And about 7% for every 1 degree is what you're looking at. And we could be, by the end of the century, looking at a 3-degree global average warming increase. I mean, it's just incredible to think about how fast that is coming at us. It is not just an incremental change, it is now galloping towards us. Quiet, Riot.
I've always wondered, I actually wrote a piece about this more than 10 years ago in The Guardian, when there was a particularly bad series of floods during the coalition's time. I wonder if the problem is that there is actually a bit of an incompatibility between climate action and conservative politics on several levels, actually. The sort of look after our country first nationalism is the direct opposite to the internationalism that you need
in order to
deal with this stuff, to the giving away of bits of sovereignty, actually. And also the kind of shrink the state laissez-faire neoliberalism, because dealing with both climate action and the impact of freak weather, actually it requires quite a muscular state. It requires quite a well-funded, big state.
You love a big state.
I do. I love it. I love a muscular state. I love a state that goes to the gym. I love a state with veins throbbing. What were we talking about again? Oh, yes. And I remember at the time that, like, one of the reasons the floods had been that bad is that there were certain rivers that hadn't been dredged for a while, because one of the big losers of austerity was the environmental agency that particular government saw as a bit of a luxury, basically, and really
differed foreign aid. Where it's not, where we're not cutting back here, we're cutting back elsewhere. Communities that are much more vulnerable to climate change impact.
And you will have heard what Arthur Snell said when I was chatting to him for the midweek episode, where he said that part of the problem with Starmer and Lamy going to the UN General Assembly and making really very strident, we are now a different sort of partner statements, welcome as they are by other world leaders, is that part of what gave us our muscle in that kind of setting in the UN General Assembly was that we had a huge foreign development budget, that we put our money where our mouth was. So I think that is something, actually, that reasonable, moderate conservatives will have to sort for themselves in the next few years, because as far as I can see, it's only going to be a crisis deferred. unless they deal with it at a fundamental level, unless they find a way to marry their low-tax, small-state, national interest first creed with the internationalist, well-funded, muscular approach that is
And Alex,
required, it's going to be a problem.
even if they're not moderate conservatives, even if they are the type who are petrified of refugees and asylum seekers to the extent that they want to put extra wave machines in the channel and water cannon dinghies or whatever it is, if you're so worried about mass migration, then for God's sake, reinstall the foreign aid budget and make sure that these people have got the resources they need to try and mitigate the impact of climate change in their areas, so that you are not going to have such enormous swathes of migration.
Every intelligent assessment of Arab Spring pinpoints the primary cause as the price of grain at the time due to crop failures, due to climate change. There is a massive war raging in South Sudan at the moment that has displaced internally millions of people.
Yes.
And is beginning to displace people externally. That is almost entirely because of environmental reasons. So get your head screwed on, I guess is what I'm saying. The extent to which it is ignored. Instead, you have young people, 2 young women's lives pretty much destroyed for throwing soup at a glass case.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the Just Stop Oil conviction.
I don't agree with that kind of action, as you know. But I do find the inability to take into account how righteous and justified their anger and frustration is. I find that really quite incredible, especially when there was no real damage or harm caused.
There's no real gain to the cause either. That's my big issue.
No,
I'm not passing judgment on their sentence, but
I agree. We've discussed this before. I think it is a way of turning hearts and minds against you. Absolutely. But it's just a stupid thing that hurt nobody that 2 20-year-olds did. And you put them in prison for nearly 2 years. I don't get that.
I understand the point that you're making, and I agree. And I think that is a very hefty sentence for what was an act of desperation over the situation we've just been discussing. And it is the most existential threat to humanity. We do need to have multilateral action. That is being far too slow. It is incredibly worrying because we can all do our recycling. We can turn the heating down. We can take a bag for life to the supermarket with us. But until it's done at that macro pan-governmental level, nothing is going to have any significant impact at the level that we're going to need it for.
It can't be beyond the capability of huge companies to come up with an environmental points cost so that next to every product you're seeing the price and also the environmental impact, and to have a system of sorting results. You do now, you say sort by price plus postage.
Yeah,
you could just sort
carbon
plus
impact,
price plus
and actually a lot of them
plus
do
carbon impact.
Yeah, and a lot of them report on it to their shareholders anyway. There's been all sorts done over the last 20 years to really improve sustainable accounting, to be able to demonstrate the resourcing impact of what you've done, what you've produced, what you bought, what you sold. You're right, the data is available.
And that would help me to make a choice. Not everyone can afford to make that choice, and I do understand that, but it's impossible to make if you don't have the actual information. And some people can afford to make that choice and say, I'm going to go for this slightly more expensive thing and this slightly more expensive method of delivery because it has a lower impact on the environment. So I don't see why it's not there.
And if you want to go vegan, I will support you.
Yes, as you know, I am. No, I've made a huge effort to reduce the amount of meat that I eat. I always have several vegan days in a week. but I find it difficult to get off the crack
Of course.
altogether.
I think anyone aiming to reduce their animal consumption is an excellent thing for the animals, for their own health and the environment. And the fact that more and more people are now treating meat and fish as a treat, as a thing they have when they go out, or as a special meal once or twice a week, I think is brilliant. And the more people can do that, the better.
Quiet Riot.
And that's it for this week's Quiet Riot Sunday School. We put the world to rights once more.
Don't forget to subscribe at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod if you want to be included in our next editorial meeting, and you can't stretch to that right now. Just leave us a review instead.
And not instead, drop us a line to quietriotpod@gmail.com with any ideas you have for future show or feedback on shows of old. We love hearing from you.
Thank you so much for listening. As ever, we'll be back with more shows later in the week. So until then, enjoy the last of September and know that we love you lots.
Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads, with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Holy smokes! It's time once again for Quiet Riot Sunday School. The weekend vicar to our Thursday kicker.
Sorry, sweetheart. You do that again. You caught me a little bit unaware. Okay, all right. I'm going to calm down now.
No, you're not, because when I do it again, it's just going to set you off again.
No, I am. I'm going to switch my microphone off until it's my turn.
Okay. Holy smokes! It's time once again for Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend vicar to our Thursday kicker. I'm Naomi Smith. You're on mute, Alex.
That was so much worse. Oh God! Oh, sweet Lord! That was amazing. Okay, all right.